Quick Copy's helped us with our rebrand in the last year or so. They've done some fantastic signage for our windows, which we've received really positive feedback from new clients that have said the signage has actually attracted them in. We find Quick Copy very accessible. We get responses within 24 hours and things are delivered really quickly. So it makes working with them really, really easy.
Make a break for the border. New South Wales is wide open. The only border that matters here is blue and inviting. So jump the fence and be our guest. Make your great escape to the freedom of New South Wales.
And welcome to AACTA Pitch Isolation, presented in association with Monster Pictures. My name is Daniel Lamon. I'm a Melbourne-based theatre director, writer for the film website Switch, and host of the Disney History podcast Ink and Paint, a journey through the Disney animated classics. And I'll be your moderator for today's event. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional custodians and original storytellers of the lands on which we are all speaking today. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders joining us today, also paying my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So this year with AACTA Pitch, we're working with Monster Pictures to find the next great Australian horror film. It's a national competition with filmmakers pitching their ideas based on a theme they've been given. This year, the theme is isolation. Seems pretty appropriate for 2020, but long before we all needed to stay safe in our homes, isolation has been one of the most powerful and effective tools for horror storytelling. Think films like The BABADOOK or Wolf Creek or I Am Mother, or even this year's The Invisible Man. Joining me today are our three judges. We have Grant Hardy, who is the owner of Monster Pictures, Chris Brown, the producer of films such as Daybreakers, Bait and The Railway Man, and Toby Louis and Nicholas Levine from Fairvale Entertainment. Hi everyone, how's it all going?
Very well, thank you.
Sorry, I just threw it out there like, everybody talk to me.
Hi.
So, quick fun question to ask, because I, as a film buff, am always fascinated by this question. Do you have a favorite horror film?
That's a very, very tough question. I have, I have many favorite horror films, but if you were talking Australian horror films, there's just so many great ones from not strictly a horror, but I think a film that is horrific and speaks to the theme of isolation is Wake in Fright. I think.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if there was ever a great Australian film about isolation, Wake in Fright pretty much fits the bill to a T.
And it's pretty horrific, honestly.
Yeah. Yes.
Pretty horrific.
How about for you, Chris? Do you have a favorite?
Well, I think I'm with Grant on that one. Wake in Fright. But I got to say, the first Evil Dead takes a lot of beating.
Oh yeah, it's pretty. That's pretty special. And what about for
that trilogy? I'm afraid I'm going to kind of hijack the trilogy because Army of Darkness is my favorite funny horror film of all time.
Hey, look, it's one of those rare cases where all the films in that trilogy are good, so you can own that. And Toby and Nicholas, do you have a favorite horror film? Either of you?
Well, our namesake is Fairvale Entertainment is based off the town in Psycho, Fairvale, California.
Of course it is.
So Psycho has to be up there for us. But there are plenty of other ones that we love. So
I'm a bit of a purist. So something like Psycho or The Shining.
I mean, Psycho is so good that it almost doesn't count as an answer. I always think whenever I think about the great horror film, Psycho almost doesn't quite count because it's just too good.
Still love it. Still seen it many times.
Oh, it's the best. It's the best. Well, that's our judges. But now we should get on to our fantastic finalists who are all here today. I won't introduce you all now. I'll introduce you when you come up for your pitches because there are so many of you. But I had a look at them and I can say that they're really exciting ideas. So looking forward to hearing from you all. So each of the finalists will have 10 minutes to share your ideas with us, beginning with a 3-minute pitch and then some questions from the judges. I'll be keeping an eye on the time to make sure things run smoothly. I'll just gently let you know that it's 3 minutes. I won't have an alarm go off and freak you out or anything to make it any worse. The successful pitches will win $10,000 in development funds, an Australian theatrical distribution agreement with Monster Pictures Distribution, and 2 tickets to the 2021 AACTA Award Ceremony and official after party, which sounds like a pretty great prize. So let's get started. The first pitch we've got coming up is Black Heath from filmmaker Karina Bano. Karina, hello.
Hello, Daniel. Thanks for having me, everyone.
How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. I can hear my pulse through my ears right now, but I think that that's expected, but that's all right. Of course.
I'm sure you're going to do fantastic. Well, I'm going to start the timer for 3 minutes. Go ahead. Pitch us your idea.
Not too long ago, we had a family friend up and disappear. No note, no warning, no nothing. They were just gone. Soon enough, we learned that they had joined a community that lived isolated from society. This community, after doing a little research, we found out had some questionable teachings and practices that had not just gained the attention of the public, but of the authorities worldwide. Not only that, but the stories about what happened to those who attempted to leave were even more distressing. It was a cult. Now, we're unable to reach our friend, so naturally, there are some thoughts and feelings that come about. Why did they go? What does their day-to-day life look like now? What if they get stuck there? Or what's worse, what if they try and leave? This got us thinking about that moment when someone who was once so lost and helpless that they fled in the middle of the night after a stranger extends an offer to live in a remote community in the shadows of the Blue Mountains and cut off all communications with the outside world. And then for them to turn around and decide, enough is enough. Escaping is my only option. What would they have had to have seen and done to get to that moment? Our story starts when Max has just had that moment. She's just fled what some would call a cult, but what they call the family. She's on Richard's doorstep. He's her childhood best friend, and now he's her only hope. He encourages Max to unpack the last horrific 5 years. Public shaming ceremonies, brutal disciplinary systems, especially for the children involved, and dangerous restrictions to the outside world, even if it means denying medical care to a desperate mother-to-be. That was her reality. Max made a commitment, a vow, and now she's trying to reconcile what's real and what was a carefully crafted manipulation. Max needs to readjust to the outside world, a world that she left behind. And now she lives in constant fear because after everything she's been through, there's one thing that she knows for sure. No one leaves the family without consequences. This is Black Heath. It's Martha Marcy May Marlene meets the Invisible Man. It's Nexium meets Jonestown. Exploring themes of isolation, paranoia, trauma, and the cycle of injustice, Black Heath tells the story that we're all dying to hear, but we're terrified we'll fall victim to.
Great. Within time. Great job.
Yay!
Now, I have to ask, as someone who grew up for a bit in the Blue Mountains, why Black Heath? Like, I have family who still live in Black Heath.
Oh, should I say I'm sorry? Or no, I'm kidding.
It's very high up. It's very far away.
Well, Black Heath is a location for a real community at the moment. However, Black Heath itself, I think, is in the vicinity. However, is a very strong title, and we really wanted to utilize the Australiana on the ground mythos that is our dark history.
Great. I didn't know there was a community living up there. That's very good. So I'm going to ask my family
There
about
is.
that.
Quick Google search. It's the first one that comes up.
Well, I'm going to throw over to the judges now to ask questions. We've got 5 minutes allocated for questions. We'll start with alphabetical order. Chris, do you have any questions for Karina?
I like it because it's kind of rooted in reality, and good horror is always rooted in reality. But what I want to know is what's different. I mean, this is something which we see all the time, particularly in America, with people trying to leave the cult and they can't leave the cult, and then their lives are destroyed, and then they're undermined and rubbished and all the rest of it. This is actually more like real life drama. I just like, how and where do you take this? I mean, it's like, what was the film, the Swedish film, Summer, what's it? You know, where they go to that
Midsummer.
Midsummer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is it kind of like a Midsummer thing? Is it that extreme? You know, because what was great about that was it was all kind of like warm and cuddly, and then you suddenly find out, you know, they're cutting people to pieces and sacrificing people, and it's all very much in that kind of Wicker Man. Is it in the Wicker Man space, or is it just straight ahead based in reality, or does it cross that line? You know, where does it actually sit? Because this is something we're all very aware of, and something that happens every day. And as I said, that's great because it roots the story in a kind of reality. But where do you take it?
Well, I think that the blessing of horror is that you can really explore some genuine societal issues through metaphor. And, you know, through our research of the cults of, you know, past and ones that are occurring right now, they all usually go along a quite a similar line, and they start with good intentions. It's never that we're trying to hack people to pieces and that's why we should all get together. It's usually that we want a better life, or we want equality, or to disconnect from, you know, what society or the status quo as such. So there is that normalcy, but I think that as people with power go along, there is definitely that frailty that develops within the leaders, and the loyalty and devotion to that way of life can sometimes mean you do things that you never thought you were capable of. So it does definitely cross that line into more of a horrific elements. But most of the events that we have planned for the horrific events are based on true accounts. So they are grounded in reality, but will be explored in a more dramatic sense for the film.
Okay.
Grant, do you have any questions for Karina?
Well, actually, Chris asked exactly what I was going to ask. So I think Chris has covered me there. Well done. Karina,
Thanks,
just one last thing. You're a performer.
I am.
Are you intending to play the lead role?
Actually, in the sizzle reel that you've seen, that's my sister, Rochelle, my team is made up of Rochelle Bano, my twin sister, and George Ma, who's our co-writer, producer, and editor. She actually played the Max in our sizzle reel. It's not necessarily a done deal, but, you know, we know that story quite well. The situation actually turned out because we were in quarantine, and so someone had to be on camera, someone had to be in front of the camera. Sure. But it's something we'd love, but it's not, you know.
Nicholas, do you have any questions?
I've got quite a difficult question actually, but I'm going to try and ask it in a fairly simple way, and just to kind of for the sake of time. The thing I've always found very interesting about cult movies, and Martha May Marlene is a very good example of it, which Karina cited before, is that actually there isn't a very clear sense of like protagonist and antagonist. It's not necessarily judging the cult per se. It's a lot more ambiguous, a lot more ambivalent in the way that it presents it. So my question, I think, really just sort of distill it down is this: is the way that you're intending to do it that you are dealing with definitive victim and definitive sort of persecution, or is it going to be more in depth in terms of kind of understanding and analyzing like where these people come from and what the thinking is? But because there's a lot to unpick there, and I just was wondering how sort of definitive or ambiguous you wanted it to be. I guess that's the question.
Yeah, I think that Max is definitely our protagonist, but I think her dichotomy is balancing, you know, not only what she's you know, growing to understand is traumatic behavior that she's both been witness to and also caused. I think that sort of dealing with what you take part in and what you sort of have your blinders onto when you're participating in something that is the norm around you. So once she takes that step outside, I think it's a little bit easier to cast those judgments in reflection. So there is definitely the, you know, head figure of the cult Deuce, who will be analyzing his sort of downward spiral into that antagonist. But it will be told, I think, through that perspective of Max, where she is trying to cope with her own, the own trauma that she has caused herself.
Great. Okay, thank you.
And Toby, do you have any last questions?
No, I think everyone covered it. I think with Chris's question, mine was very much more in the line of tone and where you kind of see this fitting. It feels more like a thriller, a dramatic thriller, than it does necessarily a horror film. So that was my main question as I was listening to your pitch.
Right. Well, you're right in that. I think that as our tonal references are, the like Martha Marcy May Marlene and Invisible Man and those sorts of films, it's more in terms of like a psychological horror. There will definitely be that build-up of dread and foreboding presence throughout the film, and I think that we will dip into the more horrific elements of it towards our climax. And I think that by that point, that build up for an audience, the gore factor will be earned and will be really rewarding. So I wouldn't say it's more of a slasher horror film. It's definitely more in that psychological
sure.
elements.
But it's more of a, it's like David Koresh as opposed to Midsummer. That's kind of where I was going with it.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you for your fantastic questions. Thank you, Karina, for your fantastic pitch. You can take a breather now. We can hand the pressure over to somebody else. Thank you very much. All right, next up, we have the pitch for Burning. So we've got Jordan Watton and Julia Corcoran to tell us about this particular pitch. I'll hand it over to the two of you.
Hey, Daniel, how you going?
And I'll start. Not too bad. How are you going?
Good.
All right, I'm going to start your timer. Take it away.
So my name is Jordan Watton. I'm the writer and director of Burning, which is a story about John Marks, a lonely middle-aged outsider who works as a volunteer firefighter in rural Australia. What John's fellow volunteers don't know, however, is that the fires they're fighting have actually been lit by him. Our story follows John throughout the bushfire season, as suspicions turn to accusations and his firelighting turns from self-made opportunities at heroism to a means through which to punish and inflict pain on the local community. Burning is a gritty and anxious psychological thriller that moves at a propulsive pace with kinetic camera movement and a driving rock-influenced score that captures the aggressive masculinity of life in rural Australia. We'd be looking to partner with an Australian musician like Gareth Lydiard from the Drones or Kieran J. Callanan to create that score, a partnership that would play a big role in both the production and the marketing of the film. Our film is a uniquely Australian take on the isolation, anger, and rage that has fueled the international phenomenon of incel culture and white male terrorism, set amongst the inferno of the Australian bushfire season. We'll explore our main character's desire for heroism as a desire to be accepted and loved, and his actions in lighting bushfires as a misplaced desire for both. All this set against a backdrop that touches on the interlinking themes of the masculinity, the far right, and global warming. Most importantly to me, though, is that Burning does in fact feel uniquely Australian, focusing on working class people in rural Australia and touching on the ideas of class, masculinity, and a fair go that make up so much of our national character. We describe the film as Taxi Driver meets Snowtown, a lonely outsider's journey to radicalisation set in the underbelly of rural Australia.
Hi, I'm Julia Corcoran, producer of Burning. Burning is based on a number of true stories of arsonists. The recent events in Australia and internationally have bushfires at the forefront of the social conscience. Mixed with the current trends in true crime and the true crime genre, there is an appetite in this audience for these stories. Additionally, Australian crime films have often been embraced by Australian audiences and drawn critical acclaim internationally. This is why we feel Burning is a great first feature project for both Jordan and I. We've seen success of these emerging directors and producers with these styles of film, such as Chopper, Animal Kingdom, and Two Hands. Burning is written in a way that is achievable on a low budget, being set in one small town with one main character. The VFX elements of the fire will be contained in the coverage, and we're confident in our ability to achieve this with our professional resources and relationships that we've been fostering in our careers to date. Thanks again to Monster Pictures and AACTA for considering Burning. This experience has been really invaluable for both of us and for the project.
Perfect. Bang on 3 minutes. Good work. Before I hand over to the judges, where the kernel of this idea, where did it come from? This thing I'd quite like to know. Where did this come from?
I was living overseas last bushfire season, and my partner is from Jindabyne, and we had her grandmother and mother over. And just during that time, the bushfires started to take off, and their houses were both at risk. So we were sitting over there in New York watching the fire radars. They were wondering, like, they're on the opposite side of the world, worried that their houses were going to burn down. So we were focused on the news the whole time. And then I came across a podcast on ABC that was all about arsonists, and I just went down this rabbit hole, and there started to be a similar theme of a lot of the people who would light bushfires that got caught, a lot of them were volunteer firefighters. They share a common theme. And it's not just in Australia, it's overseas as well. I just found that very interesting and kind of went from there.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to hand over to the judges, but we're going to go reverse alphabetical order, just to be fair. So this time, Toby, you get to go first. Do you have any questions?
No, I found this pitch to be very intriguing. It's a very different type of story, and it sounds like it's something that Australians know as far as this happening and this occurring in the real world. How real do you want to get with that? And are you going to deviate at all in terms of making it a little bit what's the word for it? I guess just a little bit more just a little bit more creative in the sense that it's not just a straight drama. It's gonna have a little bit more oomph to it. It's gonna have a little bit of a style to it. I'm just curious, kind of how you see it as you're thinking about it as a director.
Visually, you mean?
Visually and stylistically.
I think for this, I really like the work of the Safdie brothers. That kind of really propulsive, anxious feeling where you constantly feel like you're on the edge of the seat, and the story feels like it's always moving at a very fast pace. I think I really like that feeling for this kind of story, and that was one of the big influences. So I didn't imagine it necessarily, even though it is like a bit of a character study, definitely not slow. I think it has like a definite style to it, and I think aggressive is probably the term that I keep coming back to. That we want to go for a score that's very fast and aggressive, and also the edit pace. I just think it's about capturing that like rough masculinity that you do get in Australia. That's part of like that macho culture of, I don't know, men in that kind of part of the world.
Right, Nicholas, do you have any questions?
I mean, and just wanted to ask, first of all, if you can hear me okay. I've been having a bit of problem with my sound. I may actually have to log out and log back in again. But
nope, you're coming through very clear.
Okay, great. I think it may just be my end then. But let me just ask this: the comp, you mentioned a couple of comps to the film. I like Toby found this a very interesting one indeed. The project that came to mind, and I think it may have been in the pitch deck, was Nightcrawler. Actually, that's the one that I was very struck by as a sort of potential comp within this, because of the sort of nature of the character and the idea of the becoming obsessed with something that you're actually sort of generating in order to kind of have the purpose for it. I just wondered to what extent, again, sort of getting inside the mind of the character and sort of really substantiating that protagonist's motivations, even if it's not someone who we're supposed to identify with. I just wondered how kind of in depth you sort of wanted to kind of go on that sort of psychological journey with the character, as opposed to it just simply being sort of, I don't want to say superficial, but just sort of like, okay, it's somebody who's crazy, versus really sort of trying to understand the psychology underneath that.
I think that is the main motivation, and almost the arc of the whole film, like getting inside that person's headspace and trying to, I don't want it to feel like you're kind of coming at it from an angle where you're looking at someone like they're an other and they're a very, you're kind of looking at someone who's necessarily evil. I think you want to come in there and see that person's motivations and almost come at it from an empathetic point of view. I've talked to Julia many times about it. I think the feeling that you want to leave with at the end is this really like twisted, awkward, uncomfortable feeling that you can understand why that person has done it, and you feel sorry for them despite knowing that what they have done is objectively wrong and what some people would call evil. I think there's a real like twist to that, I think, which feels really nice to me.
Grant, any questions from you?
Obviously, there's a couple of ways you can work towards the climax of this film. A lot of your references, say, Taxi Driver, you mentioned the Safdie brothers, the climax is obviously explosive violence. I guess, are you wrapping the film up with, obviously the fires that he's set, or is it more, does it bring it back to his character and how, like, I guess, just to be very simple, like, is there an explosive violent act that culminates in his, story, ending his story, or ending, the exploration of the film? Or do you more see it like, I guess for me, look, I'd say the hacky route would be to wrap it up around the fires and, the town is saved and, some other sort of protagonist emerges, or is it just stay completely with him and it's his story and it's his wrap up?
It's completely his story. Like it is like a character story. You're focusing on him the whole time. I think the climax is obviously, you probably would have seen in the pitch that it does revolve around this kind of fire scene, but it's almost like this fire has gotten out of control with him and it's gone past where he wanted it to go, basically. And I think it's his realization of that moment that kind of wraps up his whole character arc. It's him realizing that this is never what he intended. And so, yeah, I think we are sticking with him kind of the whole time. And the story does end with him as well. Okay. The final scene, yeah. Yep.
And Chris, last question. Do you have anything to ask for this pitch? You're on mute as well.
Not really. I think the guys have covered most of it. I mean, as Toby said, when I was looking at the materials, I was very much reminded of Nightcrawler, and it being like a combination of Nightcrawler and Taxi Driver, and so Toby pretty much covered that. And then what Grant was saying is, like, does it all come back to our principal character? Does he die in a ball of flame, or is he hailed as the hero and actually goes forward as somebody who actually saved the bushfires and nobody actually knows, rather like Nightcrawler, who is a total evil motherfucker who through his evil behavior actually succeeds. But your character seems a lot more sympathetic than that. And so I was kind of interested to see where the central character really ended up.
I think, well, obviously, in the pitch and the way the story stands at the moment, he does, I guess the story starts with him. He desperately wants to be considered a hero, which is the initial motivations for him lighting the fires. I think by the time it gets to the end and these fires have gotten out of control, he does reach a point where he does become considered a hero, but it's filled with a tinge of him realizing all of these things that he shouldn't have done. I think that's where it kind of comes close to Taxi Driver in that regard.
Like a moral conclusion.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Okay.
And it's a slight cliffhanger as well at the end. You don't really see the resolution of what he's just done. You see him being, interviewed on TV as a hero, but he's about to face the music as well, which we don't actually see that part.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's cool. That works.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Jordan and Julia, for a fantastic pitch. You can go breathe for a little bit now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. We're now going to hand over to Drum Chapel with Michael Irwin. Michael,
yes.
How are you going?
Yeah, good. How are you going?
I'm not too bad. All right. I'm going to start the timer. You have 3 minutes to tell us about Drum Chapel.
Sounds good.
Off you go.
So the easiest way to understanding Drum Chapel is understanding its origin. So my grandma, who was an English teacher in the 1950s in Geelong, she defined the word to me, which is a Gaelic word, which means the hollow space in your chest you feel when your heart's beating, a sort of echoey gallop, as it were. And the impression that left on me just became the foundation that evolved Drum Chapel into what it is now as a genre film. And as a filmmaker, genre films, to me, allow you to really explore that sort of collective fear. So in the case of our two characters, Morgan and Lee, as security guards working there, there's that sort of duality between the two of them where they care very much for each other, but they also know exactly what they need to do in order to survive. So particularly with Lee, where, you know, home life, she's facing this sort of suppressed grief at the fact that her only, you know, paternal figure in her life is dying, which she can't control. That sort of is paralleled by the fact that what is in her control in Drumchapel is the fact that she has to make the choice as to whether to save Morgan or not, which really is the only paternal figure she has sort of left in her life. Drumchapel, I guess its namesake, obviously coming from a quarantined 19th century workhouse itself, sort of sets itself apart from other survival horror films purely because of its justified narrative unpredictability. We, as the audience, as well as the characters, have no tangible knowledge as to, you know, what to expect and to see what they're sort of walking into. So once the idea of entering Drumchapel actually becomes a necessity. So we, as the audience and the characters, are at a sort of psychological parallel, given that Lee is really the first person in over a century to actually enter the building. And the more she sort of navigates through the place, the more the sort of answers are unearthed behind the main question of Drumchapel, which is, why was it quarantined? To me, those sort of survival thriller horror type films really live or die on their inventiveness and their adaptability. So like I was saying before, we as the audience walking with Lee into this environment, which is essentially a decayed World War I sort of atmosphere, allows for the sort of survival and problem solving really anyone watching the film could justifiably be exposed to if they were in that position. So in terms of, from an immersion point of view, it puts you right there with the characters as opposed to a sort of passive audience. In Australia, we sort of feel like we don't make films of this sort of subject matter in the approach that we're taking. If you look at classic and contemporary examples, you know, such as Bacon Fright or Picnic at Hanging Rock or Wolf Creek, the atmosphere is played as an exterior, sort of inhospitable and terrifying scale. But the commonality with that is that as an exterior setting, we as an Australian audience who have sort of grown up with those films, we're fine-tuned to know exactly what to expect and what that sort of brings to the table. You know,
that is 3 minutes.
Is that 3 minutes? Oh,
like that's 3 minutes. As beautifully eloquent as you were, it was unfortunately 3 minutes.
That's all
before I throw to the judges, the word Drumchapel. So it's a word. So your grandmother taught it to you.
Yeah. So I lived with my grandma for about 10 years before she passed away, and when I was a kid, I would stay with her on afternoons, and because she was a teacher, she would often be just rambling about all sorts of information. But there was this one word that she sort of told me, and I never forgot it, and which was that word Drumchapel, which is, you know, the Gaelic word. And I think as a kid, you know, as when you're sort of making up stories, you start to really go like, oh, that's a really interesting sort of harrowing word. But as an adult and through the events that I've sort of gone through in my life, the meaning of that word became so much more sort of grounded and emphasized by that. And then ultimately as a filmmaker, being able to take the thematic meaning of that word and being able to apply it to the sort of narrative, everything just seemed to fit in a really cohesive way that sort of wasn't forced. It just sort of made sense.
Yeah, it's an amazing word. It's amazing to think that there is a word that encapsulates that exact feeling. As soon as you said it, I was like, oh, that's amazing. I'm going to stop rambling. I'm going to hand it over to the judges. Chris, we'll go in alphabetical order this time. Chris, do you want to start?
Why don't you give Grant the opportunity this time? I'm going to think about this for a minute. I need to think about this.
Sure. Grant, do you want to jump in?
My question is, and I was hoping it might have been cleared up a bit further in the pitch.
Yeah.
You know, there's obviously, this film starts as one thing and could potentially end as another.
Yeah.
Is there a supernatural element? That's what I really want to know. Is that where it ends up? You know, you have films like, just off the top of my head, you have 10 Cloverfield Lane, for example, where you set up a really claustrophobic environment. You think one thing's going on, then at the end of it, it becomes something completely different. Is that where you see?
No.
I asked you to pick it up, Grant. That's exactly what was going through my head.
So I'm glad you asked that, and the answer is no. It's one of those things where the setup to the environment of Drumchapel, being able to lay the foundation of it could potentially be this or this or this through the eyes of a character like Lee, who is as inexperienced as we all would be in that situation. What it ends up being is, without spoiling anything, something a lot more scientifically horrific. It's essentially a historic workplace accident that has ended up leaving this place the way it has been. And I'm sort of not wanting to spoil things too much, but yeah, you do find out what the origin of being quarantined is, but it's in no way.
It's not supernatural. No. The peril is real.
It is real, yeah.
But it's not supernatural, obviously. So, okay, all right. That's. I guess that was my main. That's been my main sort of question and the thing I've wanted to know through the whole process. So,
right.
Yep.
Chris, did you have any other questions that you wanted to ask before we move on?
Not really. That was really my thing. Was I kept thinking I was missing something. You know, wait a minute, did I hear that or did I miss that? You know, it's like, what's actually stalking them? I mean, I love the idea of this place being shut for years and years and years and years, and then finally somebody being trapped inside it, and you know, like a maze. But at the same time, you know, the things that are based on a big reveal, you know, you've got to be very careful that you don't get in that terrible situation, which is suddenly nothing happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, that was the challenge of actually developing the film. And I think by addressing that exact question, the thing that I realized from a writing perspective was it would be easy to build up a film in sort of one or two set pieces and build those sort of scares. When it becomes apparent of what the actual origin of the sort of quarantine is, the story does shift, and the perspective sort of goes onto Morgan as a decision that he sort of has to make as a result of finding out that information. So in terms of the realistic horror of the situation, once the audience again does find out what that sort of thing is, I'm able to still keep the suspense up here by adding on to what we sort of find out is the quarantine, and then the result of what he might have to do once he and Lee finds out about this thing. Yeah.
Quite often when you have that kind of journey, because it is a journey, is there an emotional journey which kind of parallels that, which is to do with something happened in their past? You know, is that something that's going on with him? I mean, are you seeing that? You know,
with the character of Morgan, I think it's more so through I guess the eyes of Lee as he's helping her navigate through the place. He does start to develop those sort of paternal sort of qualities towards her, and obviously there's an inherent safety factor that he wants to make sure that she's okay. Towards the end of the film, when there is a turn in the sort of last act, and he has to make a very morally conscious choice as to his survival, pertaining specifically to Lee and whether or not he has to take action or not take action with certain things. And I'm trying to be sort of non-specific here and from a story point of view. That is really when the sort of paternal arc of his character really comes into play. And you as an audience see and you can put yourself in the situation of, would I do that if I was in that situation? Because him as a character, he does have kids. And once he finds out what this quarantined area actually does mean for the general populace, the gravity of that situation really starts to creep over him sort of in tenterhooks and really starts to...
What's the quarantine? What is it?
What's that, sorry?
What is the bugaboo? What is it?
So the quarantine, in the basement levels of Drum Chapel, there are a whole bunch of chemical weapons in terms of shells from World War I. So at the start of World War I, just to be the long and short of it, we were, as a country, developing chemical weapons to use in Europe to fight with. And workhouses, which is why I chose a workhouse as opposed to an asylum, were requisitioned by the government to actually manufacture them and store them in there. So from a storytelling point of view, I would say, well, if they're in the basement levels of this place, if someone knocked one over, they could probably all, a chain reaction would happen. If you were living in that workhouse and working there, you would have no idea what would happen there. So
people dead and mummified.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
I'm aware that we are running out of time, so I just want to throw over to Nicholas and Toby to ask questions. Nicholas, do you have any questions to ask?
To be honest, in Michael's answer to Chris's questions, he kind of answered what I was most interested in. I'm always interested in kind of like the historical origins of things. If something is based in history, and it's obviously kind of availing itself very much of like real factual background, I always think that just makes the genre much better. So I guess my question really is, I'm assuming a lot of this is actually based upon things that did happen. This is a sort of, it's conceptually possible, regardless of where you take it.
It did. I mean, looking into just to be brief, looking into the backstory of workhouses in Europe and Australia, the way we dealt with them during World War I was very clandestine, and we did use them as a disposable workforce and as well as a storage unit, despite the fact that children were living in these sort of places. And it wasn't seen as we see it now. It was just seen as a sort of practicality of, you know, where we were in the world at that sort of time. So, yeah.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Toby, last question. Do you have any last
No, I'm good. I
questions,
think that was all answered, so we can move on. But thank you for your pitch.
No worries. Thanks very much.
Great. Good work, Michael. You can go have a breather now. And we'll move on to the next person. Good work. So next we have up Fierce is our next pitch with Christian DeLessi, who is going to be telling us about this particular project.
Hey, how you
Hi,
doing?
Christian. Not too bad. How are you?
Thank you.
All right. Let's start the timer. You have 3 minutes. Off
Cool.
you go.
All right. So Fierce is a thrilling horror film. It takes an animal attack movie that meets a intimate disaster movie. And it does that with the mythical Australian big cat, which is a Black Panther. It's our, they call it phantom cat in some regions. It's like our Loch Ness or our Bigfoot, if you will. And then it combines that with the bushfires, the long history of bushfires that we have here in Australia, which is crazy. So with that, it then the story begins during a scorching Australian summer. And we've got a single mother of two, Alex Reese. She's hit rock bottom. She's not doing too well. And to make things worse is her rebellious teenage daughter, Samantha, and her geeky, cool 10-year-old son, Jamie, are beginning to resent her. And the reason for that, and Alex is, she's worried that, she's worried that she's going to become her abusive, estranged father. She recently learns that her father has died, making her the sole beneficiary of his estate. So she's called back to where she grew up, her childhood home. It's a place Alex swore that she would never return to. So the family decide to go there. They arrive at this isolated rural property amongst the Blue Mountains. And Alex is feeling very anxious and very nervous as she settles in. And that's because nothing's changed since she ran away as a teenager. It still looks the same as it once did. Soon after that, they are warned of impending bushfires. They're in the same region, but they're heading in the opposite direction. And when she's warned about that, Alex decides to stay. And it drives more division between her and her children. That night, the winds change and the bushfires race towards them. And the smoke and the embers and the ash begin to fill the atmosphere around the house. And the glowing blood orange red glow and breathes and pulsates through the bushland. It silhouettes them, and the branches look like twisted claws coming at them. And then the stakes are raised when this mythical beast emerges from the shadows. Someone's left the back door open flapping, and the panthers got inside, and you can see the silhouette of the tail amongst the blinds. You can hear the low guttural growls and hisses, the creaking floorboards. So the family have to face off against both the bushfires and this vicious apex predator that is stalking and attacking them. And nothing's going to stop this mythical beast from in search of her children, her cubs.
All right, Christian, that is 3 minutes. Wow. Thank you very much. My God, the Blue Mountains is really taking a beating today, isn't it? Everyone's going for the Blue Mountains. Did you have a big cat story near where you grew up? I could think of 3 different places I grew up where people at school were like, there's a big panther living in the bush behind us.
Absolutely. Yeah. My buddy Pete Stanley, who I collaborated with on this story, he grew up in Warrnambool, so he heard all about these big cat myths that were floating around.
Yeah. It's always a panther. I distinctly remember being told a panther lives in the bush nearby. And I was like, what is a panther doing living in the Australian bush? Anyway, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to hand it over to Toby to start with. Toby, do you have any questions for Christian?
Yeah, so I think, with stories like this, where it's fantastical and there's, a lot going on and it's driven a lot by the plot, it tends to be, you know, a lot of when it's done right. I think the movies are more self-aware. You know, it's kind of in the Shaun of the Dead kind of style. I'm curious how you see it for this film. Is it a self-aware film, or is it really trying to kind of go out on a limb and try something new?
I don't believe it is self-aware. I think that's the wrong sort of tone for it. I kind of look at it like Crawl meets Signs. It's got a lot of heart, and it's about Alex. It's a story about survival and rebirth. It's about Alex overcoming her past, reborn as the woman that she always was meant to be, and the mother that her children need her to be.
Got it. Nicholas,
just for once, I'm going to ask a practical question rather than a sort of deep philosophical question. Obviously, you've got a film in which the kind of the reality of it is very important, and you've got sort of, I mean, how much do you sort of intend to show and not show, just dealing with the fact that obviously otherwise there's an awful lot of CGI required?
Yeah, absolutely. The approach with this, particularly with the Panther stuff, is that the reason I mentioned that whole blood orange glow and the bushfires is that it kind of tends to silhouette everything, and there's lots of darkness and lots of shadows, and it was a deliberate choice to do this at night. So it's a lot of what we don't see. It's a lot of what we hear. And then the thing with the big cats and the panthers and whatnot is that they have those glowing embered eyes. So I think there's going to be a lot of that. I think there'll be a lot more practical effects. I think I want to take that approach that like where you just have maybe like forelimbs and tails and hands, things that would creep out, and sort of use minimal CGI to enhance that sort of stuff.
Or have your lead actress fight an actual panther.
We could do that too.
Yeah,
like Cat People. That old movie, yeah.
Grant, do you have any questions for Christian?
Yeah, it was actually, my question was along the same lines as Nicholas. Have you given thought, because, you know, a lot of these films the success of these films are contingent on us believing the creature, you know, how good that creature is. So I think you've answered that yeah, that was essentially my sort of question about the project, is how much of the Panther do we see and what approach you're going to take to it.
Yeah.
So I think you have answered that, Christian, so thank you.
Oh, great. Okay.
There you go, Chris. Your last question.
Well, really everything's been covered by the previous. The practical obviously being, to be honest, is the most important, because the Panther is not something you can hire from a corner shop. So, you know, it's like, although there was a fantastic Panther in England that was very old and was really good for shooting with, because it only had one tooth, would you believe? But it looked great, but it was, you know, it was like 85, so it was even better. So if one was in England, one would be using that Panther. But, you know, as Nick said, that's a lot of CGI. You've got to be, you know, it's tricky, I'd say.
Yeah, I will add that I think that with leaning on a little bit of the silhouette, you can do digital animation really well. Yeah. So I think it's a good blend of all those kind of things.
I understand what you're saying about the fires too, because all that backlit stuff could look really good too, with very little effort.
Cool.
That's pretty much.
Thanks.
Great. Good work, Christian. You can go have a bit of a breather now, and we'll move on to our next pitch, which is The Remote. We've got Kelly Bygent and Luke Neela here to tell us a bit about The Remote. How are you both going?
Good, thanks.
Very well.
All right. I'm going to start your timer. Off you go. Tell us about your project.
Hi there, I'm Kelly Bygent, the writer and director of The Remote, a found footage sci-fi horror set in the isolated outback of Australia.
And I'm Luke Neela, the producer. Now, the unique aspect of this film is that the found footage is sourced from multiple cameras, playing from the beginning of the tape until the end, then moving on to the next camera. So we're showcasing multiple perspectives of the characters, allowing us to piece together the mystery as it unfolds.
So in 2020, an enthusiastic group of young uni students arrive at a remote Australian decommissioned nuclear test site to analyse the radiation impact on the fauna. Enola, who's the focus of our story, is a bubbly third-year film student documenting the expedition. She was invited by one of the students that has a crush on her but is not considered by some in the team to be serious enough to make a proper documentary about the serious science they're working on. She sees a shooting star streaking earthward and she's like, oh my God, you can see the whole universe out here. Armed with cameras, probes and Geiger counters, they gather specimens and begin dissecting and analysing them, some of which emit high levels of radiation and display grotesque abnormalities. They find strange boreholes and gruesomely dissected animals. Someone or something is also collecting samples. Who is studying who out here? Enola is shocked by the callous disregard for the lives of their subjects. They're like, it's scientific progress, Enola. It's feral. It shouldn't even be here. As night falls, Enola notices glowing eyes just beyond the camp perimeter. Only her camera picks them up. To the naked eye, there is only impenetrable blackness. The creature emanates radiation, and whenever it's near, the Geiger counters go berserk. The crackling sound becomes a terrifying indicator of its presence and is the sound motif of the film. Their fearless team leader is grabbed by an unseen assailant and dragged into the night. His terrified screams are cut off abruptly. Whatever it is out there is relentless, and the team are picked off one by one. The darkness becomes claustrophobic and terrifying. Enola's camera night vision mode is the only way to see their tormentor and is their only hope of survival. But their enemy is too strong and too powerful. They fight heroically, but ultimately are overwhelmed. Surrounded by the flames of Enola's last-ditch defense, the creature stalks into the light, revealed for the first time. It's an alien robotic remote from a distant star. Enola fires her last flare, blinding it temporarily, and escapes into the desert. The remote shoots a beam into the sky, sending meteorites radiating out across the globe. They look just like the first shooting star, only there are dozens this time. The invasion of Earth has begun, and the camera shorts out.
Great. Bang on 3 minutes. Good work. Before we move on to the judges, I have to ask very quickly, favourite found footage films from each of you?
Probably M. Night Shyamalan's The Visit is probably, it's not as well known as like Blair Witch, but I love it because it's a horror, but it's also got elements of comedy and stuff in it. And it's also not all shaky handheld footage. It's really nicely shot and composed. And I think that's probably the biggest inspiration for this film, but I can't escape the fact that The Blair Witch is obviously right up there too.
And how about for you, Luke? Quickly, what first one that comes to your head? Favourite?
You know, Kel's probably introduced me more to the horror genre, but I think I'm naturally scared of the dark. And after watching Blair Witch, there was a couple of years where I wasn't really able to go out on the farm.
I've never been able to finish it. I'm a horror fan and I can't even finish Blair Witch. The ending, no. All right, so I'm going to hand over to Chris to start off with. Chris, do you have any questions for these guys for their pitch?
Great pitch, guys. You know, it's and lovely that you said that thing about wobbly cameras, because that does kind of drive you mad.
Yes.
Even on the best of them. But you know, I thought you'd actually shot that promo and not using footage. So I was very impressed when I found out that was actually something that actually used a whole bunch of footage from other movies. I like the story, you know, it's a good story. You know, I like the treatment. It's something very new. I don't really have any questions for you, to be honest with you. I really like this one. It really ticked a lot of boxes for me, this, in terms of style, genre, you know, story, all those things. But yeah, I'm probably going to hand over to the next person, I think.
Well, Grant?
Yeah, just a question on the style. You mentioned it runs, so it's a number of different source material. So you're saying that those different perspectives run, you're not into cutting between them concurrently. They run one after the other. So it's almost like an anthology. Well, I know that's the wrong word, but sort of in that style.
Yeah. So I think probably the best way to describe it is the film opens with a couple of cops arriving at that test site, and they find all the destruction, like all the events have happened. And they're like, what the hell happened out here? There's dead bodies, there's a burning campsite, destroyed cars. And as they're sort of trying to piece it together, it's like shot from a body camera or something. And they get taken out by something. You don't see it, bang, they're gone. And then we cut there'll be on-screen text saying camera, Enola's laptop, blah, 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 whatever. And we then go back in time to the beginning of the tale and we follow Enola, her footage, until her camera gets destroyed at a sort of a cliffhanger, sort of around the middle of the film somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then that happens right at a sort of climactic moment there. And then boom, where we go back to another camera, which gives us a sort of a brief rerun of events, but we don't watch the whole thing play out. We just sort of pick up a little bit earlier, then we let that camera play out, and then boom, that one's finished. And so we sort of step back a little bit each time, but not so much that it feels like we're watching the same movie over and over. Like, it's not like Rashomon, for example, where you're seeing sort of the same movie 5 times or whatever it is.
Yeah.
This is it was very tricky to write, but it's actually quite a simple mechanism. It did require quite a lot of choreography, but
and I guess the big thing is that you see these you see that multiple perspectives, so you start kind of uncovering more of the story as it goes along, from seeing it from another angle or a drone or something. You can start piecing it together until it kind of finishes.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a comment. Like, it seems like there's a potential that it might, the different characters as they play out. You mentioned the sort of, there's a bit of a prejudice towards the filmmaker student here. I think you just have to be careful about those tropes of, not making it too sort of cliche on that level where, there's some sort of prejudice towards, a particular person because of who they are. I think, that's just a general comment. I think that could be worth addressing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, okay. And then obviously the reveal is the last sort of footage we come across. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. And, something like, you have, a film like Cloverfield, obviously, where it turns from a very sort of minimal found footage film into an absolute blockbuster. I mean, I know you particularly, Kelly, have a background in high-end VFX, so I'm assuming the reveal is going to be pretty spectacular.
I damn well hope so.
But that's your intention, obviously. It's not just going to be. Look, I say this with the obviously the context, but it's not going to be like a Blair Witch reveal.
No, it's I mean, obviously the bulk of the footage is just suggested in camera, but I think that final reveal that's sort of the twist, if you will, and I want that to be front and center, straight up unhidden VFX. However, I think I've got a good idea of using some particle physics and stuff like that to make it an achievable scene. It is only one scene, but I don't want to shy away from straight up VFX and animation in here, and that's my background, and I'm certain I can do it in an economic fashion.
All right.
Now, I am aware we are just running a little bit out of time for this one, so I just want to jump over to Nicholas and Toby if you have any questions you would like to ask for this pitch.
Well, mine, I think, is sort of picking up a little bit on what Grant was asking about, which is Toby and I have actually had some experience with some like found footage content before, and one of the things that always comes up is and this may not be a necessary thing to answer, but I'm always curious about it. Is there a sense of like where we are watching this? Like how does it come that all of this footage sort of has kind of come together? Like why do we have this? What's the context in which we actually have all of this footage, or is that not really something that we have to concern ourselves with in this particular?
I think that's really important, and there's a preamble at the head of the tale stating that it's like all top secret footage, but a whistleblower has released it, and so filmmakers have cobbled that footage together and sort of cut it down so that it's sort of a watchable length of time.
Right, got it.
However, they haven't tried to construct a traditional edit movie out of it. They've kept it camera to camera.
Toby, do you have any last questions?
Yeah, I was curious about the monster, which obviously is revealed as this alien robot. I feel like robots as villains have been there's a great Black Mirror episode, Metalhead. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but where I think that's probably one of the best kind of villainous robots, where you're actually really terrified of what this is. And I know that it's a reveal, so throughout the movie you don't actually see it, or you see pieces of it. But I'm just curious, kind of how you are imagining that, especially since you have this VFX background, and what this robot sort of looks like, and why we are afraid of it throughout the movie.
I think the misdirect is that they think it must be some kind of radiation mutant or something. So it's not apparent that it's a robot at all. It's an animal of some kind. So when we do finally reveal it, it needs, I imagine, like, maths is sort of the universal language. So I want it to have like a sort of like an infinite Mandelbrot kind of, made up of trillions of different components. So it's not going to look like a robot as such. It's more an amorphous mass that can just sort of skulk around the environment.
It's organic, and it's
sort of organic. It's obviously a powered thing, and it's obviously metallic or whatever, but it's clearly not an alien, but it's clearly not Earth tech. It's something completely different.
I'm afraid we are going to have to move on now, everyone. Sorry about that, but thank you, Luke and Kelly, for your fantastic pitch. You can breathe a sigh of relief now. We'll now move on to Terrazone. Josh and Laura Sambono, I'm going to hand over to you to give us your pitch on this project. So take it away.
Thank you. I want you to imagine where you were in the 80s. Think shoulder pads, neon, mullets and headbands, and especially those ridiculously crazy leotards that went all the way up there, right? We know the ones we're talking about here. Imagine that the world ended right there. Now, this is where the Terrazone is.
The year is 1985, and Sydney has been reduced through nuclear war to radioactive ruin. Amy, a reclusive badass who's been trained by her mother, the ruthless Commander Schenker, to hate and kill mutants, now lives on these city streets alone, but her hatred still continues. So when she meets Erica, a sassy half-mutant teenager who's on the run from Schenker's forces, a wave of psychic energy hits Amy and triggers her traumatic memories of the past, and in turn triggers a mutation into the very thing that she hates most. Can Amy confront her past and her mother before she becomes the monster they all want her to be? So this is a deeply personal story for me, having a incredibly traumatic childhood, and 80s horror action films were my escape on VHS from my reality. And I want to tackle my past with a twist of genre and ask the question, can you rebuild your life after the world literally falls apart?
Now, I've watched Josh as he's rebuilt his life, and it is really possible. However, after a year of isolation, you can't escape past issues and traumas without your day-to-day activities. And this is a problem that we all are facing. But we have to find this way to heal rather than to ignore this.
So that's why I'm turning my pain into entertainment through an action horror film that is like Aliens meets Mad Max meets Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Now, you may be thinking a city-based post-apocalyptic action horror film, low budget, is next to impossible. But the beauty of an 80s throwback film is that low budgets are part of the charm. We have, as you would have seen from our proof of concept, if you've watched it, we have a team of collaborators who are stellar artists and they love genre. And together we're always improving and looking for innovative solutions to challenges. We know that this is our first feature and that may be a bit of a concern for you, but we've reached out to Enzo Tedeschi, who has agreed now to come on to as an executive producer and mentor on this project to ensure our success.
I'm reaching out to that kid who is like me, who feels like they're not good enough or that there's something wrong with them. I want to say that you have this monster and it's okay. You can overcome it and you can heal. Thank you.
Great, just on time. Now, I want to ask a million questions, but I don't want to take up any of the valuable time with the judges, like especially what that hand is behind you on your bookshelf.
Yes.
But I'm not gonna take up the time. I'm just gonna throw straight to Toby this time to start with asking questions. Toby, do you have any questions?
I actually don't have any questions
pitch?
on this one. I kind of understood it all from what I read and from your pitch. So thank you.
Cool.
Great. Nicholas, do you have any questions?
I'm not sure I do actually. No, it was very comprehensive, this one. I really thought you guys put it together really well. I might defer to Grant and Chris on this one.
I think I'm going to be the same. I think
We should be concerned by now, shouldn't we?
Well, no, you could actually look at it in a very positive way to say that your pitch nailed it, and that we don't actually have any questions. No, I think it was very comprehensive. It's it's a style of movie that we all are familiar with, I think, and obviously you've also had the proof of concept, which I think covers a lot of how it will look and play out. And I think for me, your pitch thus far has covered everything.
Oh,
thank you.
Good news. Thanks.
Right, Chris, do you have any questions?
Yeah, kill us.
I've got to say, I really enjoyed it. It's great fun. It's very stylish. I love the 80s thing. I am very conversant with that period. And I liked your kind of shall we call it entertainment?
Yes.
Pitch, which was very good as it being a kind of personal story and a metaphor for what you went through. I think also gives it another kind of aspect to it, which isn't just camp, because it is obviously outrageously camp.
Totally.
But at the same time, that's kind of that's what you love about it, and the colors and the the feel of it was very good. The pitch is very good. The visual pitch you did was very good.
Thank you.
So it was very comprehensive.
Can I just ask, Chris, did you happen to have wear a headband or a mullet in the 80s?
I was never able to wear a mullet. I was bald when I was 23. So headbands were about the nearest I got, but that was normally only when I was dancing to Olivia.
Right. Well, on that note, thank you very much, Josh and Laura, for your pitch. You can go breathe a sigh of relief now. Now, we are aware that Chris has to run away in about 10 minutes. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to get...
12:30 Queensland. I'm on Queensland time.
Oh, so what time is it there for you now?
It's 11:30. 11:20.
Oh, sure. Then let's just keep going exactly as we were going. All right. Ignore me what I was doing. Oh, great. Perfect. I don't have to change the scripts at all. All right. So next up, we have Under is our next pitch. So we have David Chirac and Charlotte Dario to talk to us about Under. All right. How are you both going?
Good. I actually got my tonsils out at the start of last week, so I am feeling a mixture of different things, including painkillers at the moment.
But I bet it's going to be so much better when now that you don't have the damn things, right?
Exactly, yeah.
All right, I'm going to start 3 minutes. Off you go.
Under is a socially conscious horror film that draws its scares from real-world issues. Our project explores physical isolation in its setting, but also a more insidious form of economic isolation. It is a journey into the depths of elitism and greed, and what these things can do to people. The trash fire of 2020 exposed some pretty stark inequalities in our society. The idea that some of us are expendable is terrifying. Under will make our audience feel this terror. Charlotte and I have been lucky enough to remain safe over the pandemic, but not everyone has been this fortunate. We are writing this story from a position of privilege as a cautionary tale, a warning of what we become when we prioritize status over empathy.
We've all witnessed people acting selfishly to preserve wealth and status. They ignore clear problems because they fear acknowledging them will create a change that will take away their comfort. Instead, they shift focus towards things like mobile phone towers and lizard people. It's happening all around us, from aunties who refuse to wear masks to friends of friends who post about QAnon on Facebook. Under was born from our frustration watching those around us channel their anger towards the wrong issues. COVID dragged these issues into light, but they definitely existed before it. Despite the sheltered extremity, a lot of people are becoming more aware of social injustices. This is evident in, this year's stream of BLM protests, calls to guillotine Jeff Bezos, Trump being kicked to the curb, backlash against Murdoch media. The world is waking up a bit to the fact that big money and bureaucracies don't care about them. This issue was front of mind and will be sure to resonate with our target audience.
People now welcome cultural resonance from their horror. Time and again, a large audience has turned out for socially aware horror films like Get Out, The Invisible Man, Parasite, and the list goes on. Just like these films, Under will transcend its low budget by confronting topical issues head on. Our project is not a standard genre offering. It has a point of view and a purpose. This will allow it to stand out to its audience and broaden that beyond traditional horror fans to a wider group of cinema goers.
Under highlights the systemic inequality many know exists, but some may choose to ignore. Our protagonist, for example, Catherine, is one of these people. She is successful in every sense, but is still haunted by her past misdeeds. She can't shake the idea that she got to where she was by stepping on the backs of the less fortunate. When she's forced back to her old private school, she must finally decide once and for all between her drive for status or her sense of morality.
Under will practice what it preaches. We've already actively sought to incorporate feedback from a variety of avenues and perspectives from the Australian film industry on our project. This will remain a priority for us across all stages of production. All of us lost a sense of security and safety in 2020. We have a choice between pulling further inward to protect ourselves or coming together to support each other. Under is the timely and relevant story of this urgent decision each of us have to make for ourselves.
Thank you.
Great. All in time. Good work. All right. I won't blab. I won't ask a million questions. I'll throw to the people who are supposed to ask the questions so we can work better with time. All right. Chris, you can start.
Well, what can I say? The elements that you want to explore are incredibly admirable. Like that, first off. However, how are you going to scare the shit out of the audience? That would be my first question.
So the film definitely starts off as more of a slow psychological burner, people pit against people, against their own greed and things like that. But it definitely divulges into objectively horrific elements and kind of turns into a more visceral and literal demonstration of social hierarchy. So we do definitely have conventional elements like jump scares and things like that, but they are tactful, and we definitely do have more psychological elements at the beginning. But yeah, the climax of the film is definitely is it like Skulls, or is it like a supernatural version of Skulls, or is it, you know what I mean? It's like, what are your comps, in terms of the film? How would you see it?
We kind of think of it like a film like Kill List, which starts out, it has a strong character focus and it starts out being quite realistic and psychologically drawn. But as it goes on forward, it becomes more and more kind of surreal and a little bit absurdist in terms of the sources of the violence. So this film won't be supernatural, but it will be very confronting and have a lot of, the terror will remain physical, but it'll become very kind of hyperbolic, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
Grant.
Yeah, I do. I think there's obviously, you're exploring a lot of metaphorical issues here. In your pitch, there's the allusion to obviously the creatures that seem to be hidden in the deep, dark places of the school. So, I know it's a spoiler, but I just want to be talked through that, what they are, what they do, and how it pushes us towards the climax.
So that's actually partially inspired by this, since we're exploring the kind of hypocrisy of these kind of traditional institutions, that's inspired by this orphanage in Ireland, which basically was against abortion and basically was like, we have to deliver all these babies, but they didn't have the resources to take care of them. So what they ended up doing was just shoving them in a lower level, like children and babies in this lower level of this orphanage and leaving them to fend for themselves. So that's where ultimately our story will be a journey under to the lower levels of our school setting, where the characters will be confronted with this very literal representation of deprivation and what that kind of elitism can do to people.
Okay, so it's the less fortunate students, shall we say, have somehow been banished and exist.
In essence, yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. But, and have they become supernatural creatures, or are they just, as you'd imagine, creatures that have, human creatures that have evolved due to, that being trapped?
We want to keep it as kind of grounded as possible, but they will be like kind of, as you said, like evolved humans that have been depraved for, an X amount of time. Yeah.
And what would be the history of those? Because, the obvious question then becomes, why didn't anyone know they were missing? Were they orphaned or?
Yeah, so we have been kind of circulating the idea of, them being students of, lower socioeconomic background who perhaps, are foster students who, exactly what you said, like orphans and whatnot. Do you want to?
Yeah, like it kind of ties into our themes in that they're the kind of people that wouldn't be missed. They're the kind of people taken from these kind of communities which perhaps don't have as much support and aren't, necessarily have the safety net or the backing that people like us would have.
They'd have to have some sort of economic benefit to the school then, they'd have to be exploited somehow then, I imagine.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely the underlying thing is that the headmaster of the school is harvesting their organs and selling them to the upper class that he is in circles with. So that's kind of
there you go, we got there. Boom.
Yeah.
Don't make them reveal their secrets straight away.
Sometimes we have to, I think.
Well, we're going to throw over because we are running out of time. Nicholas, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I just had a very brief one, which sort of comes on the back of, again, what Grant was asking you about. Obviously, the thing, and you cited Get Out as a comp, the thing that works so well with Get Out is that the protagonist is themselves somebody who is themselves a victim of that kind of thing, and then there's the complexity of the sort of socio sort of response to everything like this. Is there any danger that the people that we're sort of experiencing this story through are the privileged? And is there a risk that you kind of actually put an audience more at a distance because, sure, it becomes a morality tale to an extent, but at the same time, the very people who are sort of experiencing the horrors aren't people that an audience would necessarily ever identify with? In other words, the journey that the audience is going on, how do you sort of mitigate against that risk, I guess is my question.
The main character is very much becomes the antagonist by the end of the film. Most of the characters, if not, majority of the characters are the antagonists. There is reflection and representation of, good in this. But ultimately, we did want to kind of convey the image that in this world, no one kind of succeeds.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
And Toby, finishing off with our last question for this pitch.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that you referenced Get Out, because I actually think it's probably more similar to Jordan Peele's other film, Us. Like, I feel like it has, like, with the underbelly and the this other world underneath. I'm curious. It feels like there's a lot to unravel, a lot to unpack as you go through this and discover the mystery. What is keeping us kind of on our toes throughout the whole thing without having too much exposition and explaining it all in the elevator a la Vanilla Sky? Like, how do we keep the information to the onion peel working as we go through it?
So the initial focus of the film is that our protagonist is going back to our old school to confront an old trauma. So like an old classmate died, and it's a journey where she's reevaluating her own memories. So our story cuts between the past and the present, and she's kind of discovering her own culpability in the death of this less privileged student and how that relates to how she's lived her life up until now without sympathy for other people. So there's also like her peers join her. So there's like their dynamic and like how each of them have reacted to that trauma And yeah, so it's kind of like a bit of a mystery is unraveling before we get to the full-blown horror elements.
Got it. So you feel like you're going to be giving us enough information so that at the end it's not just some big reveal that we aren't emotionally connected to.
Yeah,
exactly.
The focus would definitely be on grounding the character and unraveling the themes before we get to like that full-blown, in-your-face kind of horror aspect of the film.
Got it. Okay. Thanks.
Great. Good work, David and Charlotte. You can breathe a sigh of relief. I'm now also going to go off and Google a certain orphanage in Ireland that I now need to go read a little more about. Last pitch, last one we've come to. It is Who the Bloody Hell Goes There? Oscar Axel Thorborg. Hello. Hi, Oscar. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Tell us about... There we go. Got to get the frame. Good. He's got to get the framing right. Sign of a filmmaker. Right. Good. 3 minutes. Off you go.
So, Who the Bloody Hell Goes There is a psychological horror film centered around the spread of hysteria at a wind farm in outback Australia. The staff there, consisting of 2 technicians, Sayoko and Dylan, along with the researcher Jara and the site owner Nikki, are confronted by a deranged conspiracy extremist, Keith, who believes that the sound of the wind turbines are awakening an ancient evil, and that soon giant Lovecraftian monsters will rise out of the sand and devour the world. At first, this sounds insane, but as the night progresses, pieces of Keith's crazy theory start to come to fruition, and it's not long before these staff start turning against each other. Uncertainty turns to mistrust, betrayal, and violence, and by the break of dawn, the survivors who aren't seeing monsters on the horizon are definitely seeing them amongst themselves. So the film explores the power of suggestibility and the spread of hysteria, but also the really innate human desire to fill shadows with the monsters of your own creation, whether it's literal monsters coming to consume the world or figurative monsters that we see from the people around us. Our characters are a diverse crew, with representation from First Nation to Friday Island, each bringing their own unique view of Australianism to the story. Like any good whodunit, motivations and hidden agendas are drip-fed and used to fuel the twists, tensions, and turmoil. Like how Nikki, a big city hitter, came to own this wind farm in the middle of nowhere. Or why Jared's wildlife study keeps turning up anomalies he can't really account for. Or how Dylan's father and Keith used to know each other and work the mine together before it closed. Or even just how Sayoko really loves conspiracy podcasts and is slightly more on board with this whole thing than she cares to admit. As the name suggests, Who the Bloody Hell Goes There takes inspiration from the book Who Goes There and the subsequent films The Thing and The Thing from Another World. But there's a lot of love in the rich history of horror in our film, from John Carpenter to Val Lewton. But we're also looking at more contemporary movies that deal with paranoia and descent into madness, like The Lighthouse, 10 Cloverfield Lane, A Field in England, along with some Australians like Waking Fright and Babadook. Location-wise, there's over 100 wind farms in Australia, roughly a dozen in New South Wales, South Australia, and Western Australia that have that classic Australian outback look that we really want to the film. So Geraldton, Snowtown, Silverton, there's a bunch to name, and any of these would be perfect. So exteriors would be captured on location, whilst interiors would be in studio in Melbourne. Funding-wise, along with Screen Australia, Filmvic, and other funding bodies, we'd be looking at brand sponsorship, something we've done successfully in past short horror films. Several small brands can be lined up to not only add to budget, but also help reach a wider audience through marketing opportunities upon release date. There's also the opportunity to partner with the Australian Renewable Energy Agency and the Clean Energy Council, considering that the film can sort of normalize wind farms for a lot of people. So Who the Bloody Hell Goes There is a fresh take on the people trapped in a place scenario. It brings a uniquely Australian setting to this classic of the genre. And it's going to be super scary. And a bit funny. And really good.
Perfect. 3 minutes. Great. Good job. Good job. Nice props. All right. We're going to hand back over to the judges. I think, Chris, it's your turn to be the first question. So off you go. What questions do you have for Oscar?
Muted again. So I like this. It's a good pitch. It's very visual. I like the wind farm thing. Kind of works well.
I felt so much more impressive when I did it during ISO, but now that stores are open, it feels really happy. One thing I wanted to ask to clarify was, I think in the pitch materials you said that the creatures do appear and then kind of disappear as the sun comes up. So the creatures do actually, it does actually So yeah, it's one of those ones I want to kind of leave that a little bit to the audience's interpretation. I mean, our final survivor, Jarrett, sees them. He 100% sees them. But I mean, he's been stabbed. He's losing blood. He's barely conscious, and he's exhausted after this entire night. So him looking up and seeing these things in the horizon, I mean, they could be there, but I think that's something that I want to leave sort of to the audience, because I mean, the story about the characters turning on each other sort of plays the same way, whether it's real or not. And the weird things they see, I mean, they can all be explained, but
well, I have to say, I feel the audience kind of wants to know one way or another. If it's going to be left open, it needs to be left open, but slanted in slightly one direction. Otherwise, they feel a bit cheated. But
that's entirely fair enough. If you take my personal views, that I would go that it is psychological, and that we're just seeing the culmination of what that sort of hysteria can make people see and make people believe. So it's as real for him as
I said, an interesting concept, and in my head, I kept kind of hearing the sound of the wind turbines going. So that as a soundtrack, is
100%. I was going to have that playing through the pitch, but the noise cancelling in Zoom takes it out.
So that all that kind of plays well. I like the dynamic. I like the characters. Yeah, I think it works pretty much. I think trying to get them to sponsor it, wind turbine people, when at the end you've got a lot of creatures being raised from the grave, might be an uphill battle. But
well, yeah,
apart from that, I like the idea that you did address the financial aspect of it, which was good in your pitch.
Well, yeah. So I mean, not to cut you off, but the idea that I wanted to sort of sell them would be that you're not selling a movie that says anything bad about renewable energy or wind turbines. What you're doing is you're using it as a setting, so it starts becoming something that's just that's not the question of renewable energy isn't the issue. And by having a big film going around Australia with these things sitting in the in the classic Australian outback, it just starts getting that idea across that, hey, this is what our outback looks like now.
That's it from me.
Great. Grant, I'm going to hand over to you. Do you have any questions?
Here I am. Just around the comedy aspect of it. I mean, how ramped up is the comedy? Are we talking sort of Evil Dead territory, or are we
not going to slapstick? I think it's more using a little bit of levity to give you to make the sort of the scares feel a little bit stronger. So the example that we brought up before was like Jordan Peele's films. I mean, less of Get Out, but more sort of like his what's it called? Twilight Zone, which are, I mean, they all have these sort of supernatural and scary elements, but there's also a bit of a chuckle to be had. And it's when you allow yourself to settle down with the characters, feel comfortable with them, they're having a laugh, and that's when it hits. It's like the dinner scene in Alien, You're nice and relaxed, you're having a good time with characters that you know and enjoy, and then chest buster.
Yep. Okay.
Nicholas, any questions for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's sort of the operation of the kind of like origin aspects of the whole thing. I mean, from the pitch, it's kind of framed by the sort of conspiracy theory at the beginning about the sort of unspeakable evil that's going to be awakened, and then obviously it's confirmed at the end, and there's sort of the nod to the kind of Lovecraftian horror. But and I know this is the thing, Lovecraftian kind of style horror can get away with not really explaining, but I just wondered how much throughout the course of the operation of the film would you imagine that we're actually going to kind of substantiate the mythology that you're sort of wanting to kind of base this around, because otherwise, to my mind, there is a risk that it just kind of devolves into non-stop kind of kinetic like slasher horror, which is fine. Everybody's killing each other, and then there's this button on the end. But I mean, this might be a personal prejudice, but I'm always fascinated by kind of really thought through sort of mythological structure. So I just wondered how much of that is going to inform the kind of narrative operation of the film.
So genuinely delighted you asked, because there was something I wanted to get into pitch, but I didn't have time. So the lore and the mythology is something that sort of, it sits in the background of the actual film. Keith, obviously, like, when you see his kind of the trailer that he lives in, it's, nothing but cork boards and red twine, right? And everything he sort of says can kind of relate to some of the things that have been happening at the wind farm, but it all needs to feel sort of like nonsense so that we're completely on board with, you know, our protagonist in the beginning. But then there's a little bit of cohesion in what he's saying. But at the same time, and this is just stepping outside the film for a sec, when we were discussing marketing opportunities for this, what I wanted to do was create a podcast prior to the release of the film where Keith, the actor playing Keith, plays Keith the character completely deadpan and releases like a conspiracy podcast that we can have as sort of like a way of building lore before the film releases, sort of like the website Blair Witch did, something along those lines. And we don't tie in that to the film until like, you know, a week before release. So we keep him out of the early teasers and the early promo, and then we bring him in once he's got a little bit of a, hey, have you seen this guy who's doing this insane, you know, Alex Jones kind of podcast? And then we tie that in there. So for people who are really into the lore and stuff, we can explore that in this different avenue. But in terms of the film itself, his stuff is cohesive, but just insane. And it kind of combines a lot of the conspiracy theories that like 5G signals and reptile people, little bits from sort of everything, but without settling on anything. So we don't want to politicize this, and we don't want to turn him into, and I mean, like those are things for a different film. They're definitely worth discussing, but we want to have fun with that premise of, look, he's a bit crazy. He's got these theories. Holy shit, that's what he said, and that happened. So we see him more playing that way.
Great, thank you.
And last question, Toby, have you got any questions for us?
Yeah, I think the other, Chris and Grant and Nick asked a lot of what I was thinking, but I am curious, you know, you mentioned The Thing, which obviously stood out to me when I was reading this and talking about this as one of my favorite movies. And you said that it's going to be different, but I'm curious exactly how, you know, aside from it just being, you know, an Australian, you know, set in Australia, how do you feel like this will be elevated in a modern, you know, time and really separate itself from The Thing? Because it has a lot of the same, thematically, a lot of the same.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think the thing about The Thing is that you actually have that threat, and you know that there's someone in there, you know, the blood test and stuff like that. You know that there's something there, and there is that supernatural element from the get-go. But in this, I think we get more of that sense of, hey, something's not right, but we don't think it's what he's saying. But maybe there's someone else out there. Maybe there's a prowler. Keith goes missing for a little while. They need to go and find him. But then one of them goes missing, but Keith was here all along. So it's a little bit more of that, I guess, human paranoia, as opposed to the supernatural paranoia that you get from The Thing. And I think compared to The Thing, we're probably going to play it a little bit slower and a little bit more, sort of leaving a little bit more up to the imagination, at least for the first sort of until, you know, bodies stop dropping from windmills. So it's going to be a little bit
more hidden.
Yeah, exactly. So we're looking at, I mean, it's a really old reference, but a little bit more sort of cat people kind of thing than going straight slasher.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Terrific. Good work, Oscar. Good work on a fantastic pitch. And thank you to all of you for giving fantastic pitches. You know, this is not an easy thing to do. It's a real skill, and it's a real art to be able to deliver a really clear, concise, fantastic pitch, and all of you have done so beautifully. So you can all have a breather. The pressure is off you, but now the pressure is on the judges. So we're going to take a short break where they can go and deliberate their decisions, and then we'll come back and hear what they have to say. So yeah, we'll take a short break and see you all again very soon. Welcome back, everyone, to AACTA Pitch Isolation. We've heard from these 8 brilliant pitches from these fantastic filmmakers, and now it's time to hear the judge's decision. So I'm going to hand over to Grant Hardy, the owner of Monster Pictures, to do the honours. Grant, over to you.
Okay, so I have to say it was a very, very, very tough decision, and came down to... actually literally came down to all of your final pitches here today, because you know, we obviously talked about ideas leading into this, and we were going to reserve our decision based on these final pitches. So the winner, great job, because you actually did manage to sway us with your final pitch. And look, before we announce it, I just want to say that all of you have great projects, and the pitches were fantastic. And, you know, we did, in our discussion just now, we did discuss a situation we'd like to set up where we're going to welcome all of you to keep your hand in with us. Let us know how your projects are coming along, and we'd like to continue to talk to you all. So we will set something up where that happens. We did have to choose a winner. We, again, very, very, very close decision, but the winner is Burning.
Wow, thanks.
So congratulations, Jordan. I haven't, hang on, I haven't got all of them up on my, are we missing?
No, you just got to press the little.
Is Julia here? I can't see her on here.
She actually left. She had to go back to work. She's on set today.
Right, sorry, that's what I was just looking for Julia, but I can't see her. So you'll have to pass it on to her, Jordan.
I will do. I'll call her right now. Thanks so much, guys. That unexpected. I'm really surprised.
Yeah, look, just to speak to our decision, Jordan, we just felt like you addressed a lot of really relevant issues, and it was just a very, very interesting take on a genre of filmmaking that, you know, we all know exists, and is a really complex, interesting subject matter to explore. And yeah, no, I think you sort of nailed a lot of current themes with your pitch, and it's just something we really like to see where the project goes.
Thanks.
We do have to give very special mention. It was a really, really close tie, but the remote, Luke and Callie, honestly, it came down to the wire. You know, I think your film, it's just, we can see, obviously, it's a very well thought out project. You know, it's a project that, you know, I think makes sense on every level. And, you know, it's just a really, really great pitch and really interesting idea, and something we'd like to obviously see down the track. So, you know, it was a very close decision, but, you know, obviously we had to give it to one. So congratulations, Jordan.
Again, thanks very much.
Well done.
Jordan, would you like to say anything? You've got a moment. Do you want to say anything?
I was not prepared for this, honestly. I just want to say thanks so much. Julie and I have really enjoyed the project. Like, this was a last minute thing. We had the idea we'd been talking about, and Julia came to me with the AACTA pitch, and we've really enjoyed putting the project together and seeing it come to life. And it's been really fun, almost, which has been great. So I just want to say thanks to the whole team, and thanks for going with us, I guess. Thank you.
Well, congratulations to Jordan and Julia, and good luck bringing this idea to life. Now you've actually got to go and do the thing. Look forward to seeing it in some form in the future, but also just congratulations to all the finalists. I can say, as a film buff and a horror buff and a thriller buff, I'd happily watch any of those films. They all sound fantastic, and I hope that one day we do get to see all these ideas brought to life. But yeah, congratulations to all of you for such a great job, and congratulations to Jordan and Julia for being our winners. And that's it. That's a wrap on AACTA Pitch Isolation. Thank you so much to all of our finalists. Thank you so much to all of our judges. And thank you to everyone tuning in at home who's been watching today. A big thanks as well to Monster Pictures for supporting AACTA Pitch Isolation. Make sure anyone at home to register for other events in the AACTA Screen Fest Festival. And don't forget to tune in to AACTA's Best of the Decade Australia Decides TV special on Wednesday, the 2nd of December at 8:30 p.m. and an encore on Foxtel Arts on Sunday, the 6th of December at 9:30 p.m. That's it from me. I'm Daniel Lamon. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to be the host for this particular event. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.